are you doing, little one? Are you out conquering the planet? Go conquer the planet. Strange creature from another world, out conquering the planet. Welcome back to stately Vaughn Manor. So I was thinking the other day, after I had made that top 10 classic horror video about horror and where it went during the 1950s and 60s. And so I thought, well, I'll probably make a continuation of that video and maybe go into some of the authors and books of the 50s. But there aren't that many of them when it comes to horror, actually. It wasn't a great, or at least it wasn't a prolific time for horror fiction. There was some, but not a ton of it. But one of the standouts from that time was someone I hope you've heard of and probably have read, and that's Richard Matheson. Richard Matheson was probably the greatest horror author to come out of the 1950s. He worked on my favorite show from that time, The Twilight Zone, which came out, I think Twilight Zone was early 60s. And he worked on a lot of episodes of The Twilight Zone because Rod Serling, he could not do it all. So Rod Serling hired a couple of great writers, Charles Beaumont and Richard Matheson, and they did some fantastic episodes. And Richard Matheson also did a lot of books that have been hugely influential. So we're going to talk today about Richard Matheson and a couple of his standout works. Two in particular. But before I talk about those, I should mention that some of his best work was in short story form. Richard Matheson wrote fantastic horror stories. I mean, just wonderful. And if you can get a collection or two of his horror stories, man, you will not be disappointed. I'm going to show you a couple just so you know what you might want to pick up. First one I'm going to pick up is Nightmare at 20,000 Feet. Horror stories by Richard Matheson. There you go. Now this will be familiar to you because he wrote the episode of The Twilight Zone with William Shatner, and when William Shatner saw the monster outside on the wing of the plane. This is the story of that, and a ton of other really great stories in this book. So this is definitely one you're going to want to pick up. It'll give you a real taste of Richard Matheson and his talent. He was excellent at just putting horror into an ordinary world. He was a lot different than some of the horror writers who came earlier, like H.P. Lovecraft. H.P. Lovecraft created his own world of ancient horrors and otherworldly awfulness. Richard Matheson was a lot more grounded, and his characters are very familiar. They're everyday people like you and me who just get stuck in very strange or odd or terrifying situations. Great book to pick up. Also, another great book of short stories is this one, Duel. Duel famously became Steven Spielberg's first film. Excellent collection of short stories. I think these are both Tor. Yeah, these both are available from Tor, and they're great. Definitely pick up these two volumes. Then you will have some of the best, most terrifying stories available. Get them. Before I jump into the two books that I really want to talk about, because they're the big ones, I do want to mention one of his best books, which would be Hell House. Now this came later. This was, I believe it's 1971, but let me not make a mistake. Let me double check. Yeah, copyright 1971, which means this book came out the same time that I did. I came out in 1971 as well. Fantastic book. Stephen King, who loves to put his blurbs on every horror story ever, actually did a pretty good blurb on this. Let's see, where is it? Ah, yes, Hell House is the scariest haunted house novel ever written. It looms over the rest the way the mountains loom over the foothills. That's a great little blurb. And while I don't know that it's the scariest horror novel ever, um, it's pretty darn good. And look at that great cover. I love that cover. That's just creepy. And it's a good creepy book. So yeah, check out Hell House. But before you do, let's talk about his two most influential, most fantastic books. Guys, if you're horror fans, or if you think you're horror fans, you have to have read these books. You don't know horror unless you've read these two books. First one is actually also a science fiction novel. And in fact, that's how it's billed. A lot of his stories were billed as science fiction, when in fact, they're really horror. I I don't have my copy of this. It's the Shrinking Man. Is the first book I'm talking about, The Shrinking Man. And my copy is The Phantom, man. The Phantom came and took my book. The Phantom of the Library, once again, crept up to where I had my book, took it, and now it's stashed in some strange, mysterious place. Maybe it's in the bathtub, maybe it's in the medicine cabinet, maybe it's under the couch, who knows? But he took the book and he stashed it somewhere. Damn you, Phantom! But that's okay, because I actually have another copy of it, which is in this. This is a Library of America volume. Just as an aside, the Library of America came out with 4 volumes of science fiction novels from the 50s and the 60s, and they're amazing. They're just great. Just look at that. It's such a beautiful book. This one has 4 novels in it. The Space Merchants by Frederick Fowle and C.M. Kornbluth, has More Than Human by Theodore Sturgeon, The Long Tomorrow by Leigh Brackett, that's good. Leigh Brackett's always great. And The Shrinking Man by Richard Matheson, which is really a horror novel. But I'm happy to have it in here. So The Shrinking Man, all about this poor guy who is exposed to a toxic cloud, mysterious toxic cloud, and then every day he shrinks just a tiny bit. At first it's barely noticeable, but eventually he just gets shorter and shorter and shorter until he becomes tiny. And you see it all from his perspective. So to him, from his perspective, he's not getting any smaller, but the world is getting bigger. And he goes to the doctor. He's tested over and over. It's gripping. And eventually, he gets trapped in his basement, and he's real tiny at this point. And that's when he's attacked by the spider, who's a giant spider at this point, and he has to really struggle to survive. And it's fascinating. It's a fascinating book. And he's just a normal guy, and so you see everything from a normal guy's perspective. And this is the thing that Richard Matheson was great at in this book and in the other book I'm going to talk about, which is a man alone fighting against the terrors of the world. The world is against this one guy, and he has to do it alone. He has to survive on his own. And that's the position that this guy is in eventually. Even before he's trapped in the basement, he's cut off from everybody else by this ailment. He loses his connection with his wife. It's just tragic and heartbreaking and thrilling, this book, The Shrinking Man. I cannot recommend it enough. It was also one of Stephen King's favorite stories. I was looking through Danse Macabre this morning. I forgot to bring my copy of that book in. If you ever have a chance to read Danse Macabre by Stephen King, read that book. He knows a thing or two about horror, that guy. And he has a whole thing in there about Richard Matheson and how much he loves The Shrinking Man. And it is great. It's a great horror story about this guy becoming tinier and tinier and tinier. And he knows he's doomed. He knows he's doomed. Eventually he'll become so tiny he's nothing. But he still fights on, you know? It's great. I read that book. Read The Shrinking Man. I urge you. You have not lived until you've read The Shrinking Man. And not everybody has. A lot of people have read this next book, though. But it's fantastic. It's even better than The Shrinking Man, if that's possible. And that is I Am Legend. Now, we all know this book, if only because of the movies. There's been 3 movies off this book. There was, the first one was The Last Man on Earth with Vincent Price. And Richard Matheson actually worked on the script to that movie. Incredibly low-budget movie. But not bad. It wasn't this. It wasn't the book. But it followed pretty closely, just hampered by its terribly low budget. Then that was The Last Man on Earth. Then they made The Omega Man with Charlton Heston, and that was its own. That was great in its own way, but it's not this. That was just over the top 70s craziness, and it's worth seeing. It's worth seeing too. But don't get the idea that it's this book, because it's not this book. And then they made the I Am Legend from, I can't remember what year it came out with. It's a Will Smith movie. I don't remember when it came out. And that was not great. Will Smith was all right in it. He wasn't poorly cast, but the rest of the movie, it didn't follow the story. I don't know why the movie, if the story in this is better, don't change it. Keep the story. And then they had these weird CGI things instead of the vampires. See, here's the situation that poor Neville, Robert Neville? I think it's Robert. Yeah, Robert Neville, our hero, is the last man on Earth. Everybody else has become a vampire. So it's a whole planet of vampires except for Robert Neville. For some reason, he's immune and hasn't become a vampire. And so it's this plague that overtook humanity of vampirism. And he's trapped in his house at night when these guys come out. And he's boarded up the whole place, and these vampires are all around the house being creepy. And he's stuck there during the night. And in the day, he goes out vampire hunting. And it's an amazing book. It's incredible. Again, Robert Neville was a normal guy before this catastrophe happened. And then slowly people started dying off and then coming back. It's just incredible. By far, one of the best books I've ever read. It's one of my favorites. An absolute classic. A lot of people have read this book, I know. If you have not, if somehow you have not read I Am Legend, read it. Please. Those movies that I talked about, they're not this book. This book is so much better than those movies. Especially that Will Smith movie. Man, I don't know, man. That was bad. This is a pretty great book. And it is legendary in its own way. One of the best vampire novels ever, one of the best horror novels ever. It's also science fiction because it's a science fiction take on vampirism. And so it's another survival story, another one man alone against the world, against the horrors of the world. And his world is pretty horrible. And the ending, man, when I first read this, I did not see that coming. I did not see the ending of this book coming. It just took me by surprise. Richard Matheson continued to write books pretty much his whole life. He wrote some other good books that I haven't mentioned. But these are the ones. Definitely The Shrinking Man, this book, Hell House, and those couple books of short stories that I showed you. Pick all of those up. Pick them all up. They're great. I mean, it's absolutely horror fundamentals right there. You can't be a horror fan and not have read these. So read them. Richard Matheson, amazing. Incredible guy. He will live forever in his books. So, I hope you've enjoyed your time once again here at Stately Vaughan Manor. I will see you again next time, probably not tomorrow, but the day after I will have something up here for you. All right. Enjoy your day.